What would you do if your HOA neighbor stole your $100,000 boat and tried to sail it into a storm? I'm a Coast Guard commander, and this wasn't just theft. It was a suicide mission. By the time we reached her, she was screaming for help. But karma doesn't negotiate with the arrogant. Stick around to see how I turned her reckless joyride into a legal nightmare she'll never escape. Living near the water was my dream after decades commanding Coast Guard rescues. My new boat? A sanctuary. Until she decided it was hers. She'd glared at my dock for weeks, muttering about unfair privileges. But I never imagined she'd actually cross the line. I had dealt with entitled people before, the sort who believe the world owes them something, but nobody so bold as to sabotage someone's property and take it for a joyride. The mere thought that anyone would have the audacity to steal a Coast Guard commander's vessel still staggers me. But that's exactly what happened one morning. I'd planned a maintenance check to make sure my boat was in top shape for an upcoming fishing trip. The moment I stepped onto the dock, I felt something was off. The dock felt wrong. Too light, too quiet. My ropes weren't just untied. They'd been slashed. That's when the training kicked in. Find her before the sea does. I froze, staring at that severed rope for a long second. Questions fired through my mind. Who would do this? Why would they do it? And more importantly, where was my boat now? People in the community had teased me about my fancy security measures, like the onboard tracker. But in that moment, all I could think was thank goodness I was paranoid enough to install it. Without hesitating, I pulled out my phone, opened the boat tracker app, and watched the blinking dot drifting farther and farther from shore. As I processed the location data, my neighbor Mr. Thompson hollered from down the street. "I saw that woman from the HOA messing around the dock earlier. Figured you gave her permission." That was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. She'd been complaining about my boat for weeks, claiming it ruined the condominium's aesthetic. So apparently she decided to fix the problem by stealing it. Here's how arrogance met the Atlantic, with me right on its tail. I jumped into my truck and made a beeline for the Coast Guard station, my mind racing. Most people in my position would probably call the police first, but I knew this neighbor wasn't just waltzing into any old calm bay. She was literally steering a stolen craft into unpredictable waters, and it looked like she was heading straight into an upcoming squall. If the weather turned quickly, we'd have a genuine rescue on our hands, and the last thing I wanted was for her to drown on my watch. I phoned a colleague on duty, breathless as I explained. "You won't believe this, but my HOA neighbor stole my boat. She's way out there, and the tracker says she's going off course." His response was a mix of laughter and disbelief. "You're telling me that the same woman who filed all those petty HOA complaints took your Coast Guard level vessel and just sailed off?" "Not sailed," I replied, "more like flailing. We have to move now." Within minutes, we scrambled a patrol boat, alerting the rest of the team. As soon as we hit open water, the wind carried a hint of the storm building on the horizon. I'd seen plenty of storms in my career, rescued my share of reckless boaters. The difference this time was personal. It was my vessel, and if she managed to sink it, there'd be a lot more at stake than just property damage. No matter how furious I was, a lifetime in the Coast Guard had trained me to keep my composure under pressure. We picked up speed, following the tracker's coordinates. The sun glinted off the waves, and every time I looked at the horizon, I swear the sky grew a touch darker. This wasn't going to be a mild drizzle. We were on a collision course with a full-blown squall if we didn't act quickly. Waves got choppier as we advanced, but my crew and I were used to rough seas. The real question was whether she would manage to keep afloat until we reached her. Every so often, I'd radio back to the station to coordinate rescue steps. My colleague joked, "You know, if she was protesting that your boat didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic, she's doing a lousy job keeping it pristine." I forced a laugh, but inside, my anger simmered. Not only had she committed a crime, but she was also risking her life and possibly other people's if the rescue got complicated. Finally, the tracker indicated we were close. Looking across the waves, I spotted a bobbing shape in the distance, rocking wildly. The boat was spinning, its engine struggling with conflicting controls. I could practically imagine her yanking the throttle and wheel in panic. Clearly, she had no idea how to operate it, and if she had never been out in a serious storm, she didn't grasp how quickly things could turn deadly. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady as I reached for the radio. We switched to an open channel, making sure she could hear us. Coast Guard to unauthorized vessel. Identify yourself now. I half expected silence or maybe panicked shrieking. What I heard was even better. Help! The boat's broken. It won't stop. That's when I let my anger bleed through just a bit. Ma'am, you're under arrest. And the ocean doesn't care about your HOA votes. I know it was a bit dramatic, but she needed to realize this wasn't a game. The air crackled with tension. She cried something unintelligible about not being able to turn around. On our approach, we could actually see her flailing at the controls. Would she surrender? Or would the ocean do what I couldn't? We circled closer, scanning for signs of real danger. Water splashed over her hull, and she looked frantic. I saw her wave both arms like a castaway in a cartoon. As soon as she realized we were the Coast Guard, her expression shifted from desperation to dread. She understood she wasn't just being rescued, she was being caught. If you've ever watched someone realize they went from feeling righteous to undeniably wrong, you'll know the look she gave us. I signaled the rest of the team to maintain a safe distance. High waves or not, we had procedures for this. Gripping the radio again, I said coldly, "Power down your engine. Do not attempt to move. We're boarding for your safety and for our investigation." Her reply was a garbled mix of, "I didn't mean," and "It's not my fault." Frankly, I'd heard it all before. Excuses don't hold water out here. We maneuvered alongside, hooking onto the rail. One of my crew members jumped aboard and cut the engine. She stumbled away, arms up, babbling, "I was just borrowing it. The ropes weren't cut, they were loose. I swear." She hardly seemed to know what lie to stick with. Meanwhile, my crew and I exchanged glances. This was an absolute farce. I couldn't believe she'd tried to blame me for not making it clear that the boat was off limits. The arrogance was astounding. By this time, the wind was kicking up hard. We needed to get back to shore before the squall fully descended. The sense of urgency magnified everything. Lightning flickered in the distance, just enough to remind us that the ocean was in charge here, not us. We secured her, my boat, and ourselves, then started the haul back. My colleague took the helm of my vessel. Under skilled hands, it glided across the water with zero trouble. Proving her claims that it was broken were absurd. She glowered, but held her tongue. I think she realized any argument now was pointless. On the return trip, I watched the coastline appear through the haze. Gritting my teeth against the rising wind, I kept one eye on her. She stood hunched, hair whipped around by the gale, her fancy outfit soaked. Every time thunder rumbled, she flinched. Her bravado? Gone. This was the same woman who strutted around the neighborhood complaining about other people's boats. Now she looked like a trembling cat in a downpour. Eventually, we made it to the dock. The storm was still ramping up, so we wasted no time handing her off to an awaiting officer. At first, she tried to posture. "I'm a respectable citizen. You have no right to treat me like some criminal." One of the Coast Guard members gave her a raised brow, calmly stating, "Ma'am, you stole a $100,000 boat from a Coast Guard commander and endangered yourself at sea. Respectable or not, you're facing serious charges." I almost felt a dark satisfaction at her stunned expression. It sank in that this was real. There were going to be legal ramifications that might follow her for the rest of her life. She grabbed my arm in a last-ditch bid for mercy. "You're not really pressing charges, are you? This was just a misunderstanding." I pulled away, reminding her, "A misunderstanding? You cut my ropes, snuck off with my boat, and risked your life. That's theft, not a casual mistake." As she was taken to the station for a statement, the thunder rattled overhead, and rain began drenching the pier. I lingered a moment, staring at my boat, my pride and joy, and felt equal parts relief and anger. The vessel was fine, but the principle of it boiled my blood. Let this be a warning, I thought, to anyone who believes the ocean is a playground. You don't toy with the sea, and you definitely don't toy with the property of someone who's dedicated their career to saving lives out here. In the days that followed, she tried every tactic to avoid the consequences. First, she sent me apologetic messages, claiming she never intended any harm. Then she insisted she hadn't realized it was legally considered theft. Of course, I didn't buy it. We both knew what she was doing. She reached out to the HOA board too, attempting to leverage her position. But the board members knew me. I'd built a good rapport by helping out whenever there was a community emergency or question about water safety. They weren't about to side with her, especially after the Coast Guard wrote an official report. She tried calling an emergency meeting of the HOA to pressure me into dropping charges. That backfired spectacularly. People were appalled that she would steal from a neighbor, let alone attempt to downplay it. When that failed, she offered me money, straight up tried to bribe me with a settlement for all the inconvenience. By that point, I was done. She had disrespected me, my property, and my service. This wasn't about money, it was about accountability. So I pressed forward with the lawsuit, and she faced criminal charges for theft and illegal operation of a vessel. In court, she squirmed, stammered, and tried to portray herself as a victim of an overzealous boat owner. Her story was so flimsy that even her own lawyer looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The judge wasn't having it. With all the evidence, the cut ropes, the Coast Guard rescue operation, the admission on record that she took the boat without permission, her claims fell apart. In the end, she got slapped with a hefty fine, was ordered to pay my legal fees, and her criminal record gained a permanent blemish. But her comeuppance didn't stop at the courthouse. Word spreads fast in a gated community, especially one where everyone's somewhat dependent on neighborly goodwill. She found herself ostracized. No one wanted to be aligned with someone who had stolen from another resident and sparked a near disaster at sea. The best part? She sold her house, but not before the HOA voted unanimously to ban her from the docks. Turns out stealing a Coast Guard boat isn't aesthetic enough for the neighborhood. That final blow knocked the wind out of her. Within a few months, she was gone, house on the market, signs up, moving trucks loaded. She vanished quietly, without a single attempt at a goodbye. Maybe she realized her social capital was depleted, or maybe she just wanted to escape the humiliation. Either way, I watched her leave from my kitchen window one afternoon, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Sometimes arrogance meets the Atlantic, and the Atlantic wins. As for me, I added even more security measures to my boat, partly to deter future thieves, partly for my own peace of mind. I'll never forget the absurd moment I realized someone had the nerve to slash my ropes and float off with my property. The moral is simple. The ocean demands respect. If you don't grasp that, it will teach you a lesson you won't soon forget. And if you think you can outrun the repercussions of a crime, remember that karma can arrive even faster when you've wronged someone who knows these waters inside and out. So, let this be a warning. There's a reason we have laws, protocols, and basic decency among neighbors. If you want to cut corners, or in this case, cut ropes, be prepared to face the consequences, especially if you decide to tangle with the one person in the entire community who can mobilize a Coast Guard team to hunt you down. She learned that the hard way, bobbing in the middle of the ocean, out of her depth in more ways than one. In the end, justice was served. The sea didn't take her life, but it took her pride. The legal system did the rest. My boat is back on my dock where it belongs, no worse for wear. Sometimes I still walk down to the dock and feel a shiver thinking about what might have happened if the storm had closed in faster, or if my tracker had malfunctioned. She was lucky, more than she'll ever know, and hopefully she'll spend the rest of her days remembering that privilege and pride do not grant you immunity against the power of the ocean or the law. Thanks for hearing me out. While it was a personal victory, I also hope people recognize how quickly a risky choice can turn into a life-threatening emergency at sea. You might think you're just bending the rules, but Mother Nature doesn't negotiate. And if you ever find yourself feeling entitled to someone else's property, consider this story a cautionary tale. You may get far more than you bargained for.